Down on Plympton Street in Boston's South End about 6 months ago, amid the whine of planers and the buzz of table saws, you probably would not have guessed that the big, rough-hewn hunk of sugar pine Tom Pixton was pulling out of his wood rack would eventually become an exquisite single-manual harpsichord. But it did, after 6 months, which we are about to compress into 6 minutes.
Since I'm a player, I have in my head, before I begin, an idea about what I want, rather than simply making something that's a reproduction of, say, an antique, which is the most common method of making harpsichords nowadays. If you want a harpsichord to be an aesthetic exercise, that is, a reproduction of an antique musical instrument, then you would want to have wooden jacks. You would have no screws anywhere. You would have jacks that had no end pins on them. This is totally in another field from what I consider to be harpsichord making. I consider harpsichord making to be the making of a musical instrument for the purpose of making music on. What I'm doing is assembling the skeleton, the exoskeleton of the harpsichord. And in order for everything to be true and square, there's little room for error. In fact, there's no room for error. If something gets screwed up or is clamped too tightly or not tight enough, or if something is wrong, I get an irate customer on the phone. So all these things are running through my head while I'm assembling the case here. Now what I'm doing is I'm gluing in a soundboard, but it's not simply a matter of gluing a flat piece of wood to another piece of wood, because the soundboard has an elaborate built-in compression, and a lot of force must be used in order to get it to compress properly. In fact, there's so much force being built up here right now that it tends to push the floor up and the ceiling down, and I sometimes worry that the force will just crush the harpsichord, because there really is an enormous amount of tension being generated by these sticks, which are called go bars, which press against the harpsichord from the top of the go bar deck. In the haute cuisine of harpsichord making, which was the French school, which culminated in the 18th century, the instruments were always painted, and were painted with specific types of designs. And in addition to being nice looking, there is this tradition about it. My wife does the painting, but I feel strongly that it should be standard, and it having to do with the tradition of the instruments. There are more harpsichord makers in Boston now than probably were working in 17th century Antwerp, which was the capital for harpsichord making back then. So Boston seems to have become the mecca for harpsichord makers and players also. Because I do all my own work, and I make at the most about 4 instruments a year, I can indulge in more experimenting than someone who's making more than that. The past 6 instruments, each one has been slightly different. So it's very exciting to me to think that I can actually have some hand and control in making the sound. Each one of my instruments is strung slightly differently, and I always make alterations. And any particular instrument may require a slightly different stringing than another one, and I do it purely empirically. I just string it and listen to it, and if it sounds wrong, I change them. I recall the first time I really played on a harpsichord when I was 12 or 13, and sitting down and just being utterly blown away by this exciting, exotic sound. Still, this very day, when I sit down at certain instruments, I can't believe how fascinating and exciting the sound is. I think there are a lot of other people that feel the same way.